Arnold only began using steroids 3 months before a show.
Yeah.
And as soon as the show was over, he'd get off of that. All the guys did that. Nobody stayed on steroids all the time. A couple of guys did, I have to admit though, did what is common today. I can't remember the expression they used, but it basically involves staying on very low doses of steroids year round. There's a certain expression for it. I can't remember.
Cruising? Is it cruising?
And maybe it might be cruising. Yeah. Cruising, by the way, used to be a homosexual term.
Right. Because Al Pacino was in that movie, remember?
Yeah, exactly. But anyway, but the point is, I think that's what it might be. But in other words, some guys, still do that today. But that was a rarity back then. The guys would take and as I've said, before, the steroid cycles back then were laughable compared to what they are today.
Yeah.
I mean, they'd average maybe 1 or 2 injections and maybe 2 orals, and the doses were very conservative, very low. I mean, like for example, one of the more popular oral steroids, methandrostenolone, also known as Dianabol, the blue pill, was. The guys would take maybe 5 to 7 a day. That was. It was a 5 milligram pill. That's a pretty good amount.
Yeah.
But compared to what guys would take today, it was minuscule. Arnold, he used his favorite steroid was an injection called Primobolan. Mm-hmm. He got it straight from the shearing company. Believe it or not, he had contacts in Germany. Remember, he lived in Munich for a while.
Yeah.
Where they get it direct, and it was different in those days. It didn't have it was much easier to take, get steroid. He had, I don't know whether the guy worked for the company, some guy from the sharing company who manufactured Primobolan would send him the drugs right from Germany. So there was no black market crap.
Right.
He got the real pure stuff.
Right.
And I remember he favored, there was a 100 milligram injection. I think they discontinued it a couple of years later. But I actually saw, that was his favorite steroid. Mm-hmm. And sometimes he used Decadramblin. He would take a little bit of thyroid, and Frank also was also big on thyroid.
That's interesting to hear about the steroids. Do you think Arnold, when he came over to America and he was really big, do you think also he was just taking them 3 months before a show, or was he taking them more then?
I think that Arnold, for the first couple of years, actually took him. I think actually did take it more than just before contact. Because I think he took low doses. He was one of those low dose year round guys. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. He came over here. He increased the dosages, but he used it for a more limited time. In other words, rather than take small dosages year round, because Arnold back in Europe felt that the steroids, he needed to take the steroids all the time to stay big, and he was big. Well, if you look at photos of as a young man when he came in, he was a big guy for his age.
Right. I mean, oh yeah, huge.
And he felt that without the steroids, he couldn't keep that size. So he stayed on something like Dianabol, fairly, maybe 3 a day, something like that. Very conservative.
Yeah.
Probably some Primobolan acetate, year round. He got away with it. He was a young guy. It didn't really mess him up. But once he kind of matured, he came over here, and he kind of like learned how the American bodybuilders use steroids. That's when he kind of more or less duplicated their plan of use. Let's say maybe 3 months before a contest, then getting off it. And I'll tell you, he got off it because and all the guys, Frank and Arnold, all the guys back then, I mean, if you saw them 3 months after the contest, you couldn't imagine that they had just won major titles.
Right.
Arnold's physique would literally disappear. All he had left 3 months after a show, he never lost that big bicep, and for some reason his calves always stayed big. And the reason for that was Arnold would slack off on his training a couple of months after the show. He'd come in and do like 20-minute workouts, maybe 3 or 4 times a week.
Okay.
He didn't train that hard. But the thing I noticed about him, and I always remember, for some reason, he always trained his calves hard all the time. He drove maybe 15 sets of calves all year round. And I think it's because calves were so hard to get for Arnold that he, you know what I'm saying? He didn't want to get it. Didn't want to take a chance of losing them. Yeah. Same reason he took the steroids back in Europe. He didn't want to take a chance of losing the muscle. See?
Right.
So, but the thing is, in retrospect, it was actually a smart thing to do. I didn't realize it at the time, but by kind of like gliding through most of the year, just using a kind of keep in shape maintenance program, when the contest time came around, let's say 3 months before a show, they can rev it up and their bodies, because they had rested and gotten off the drugs, their bodies would respond tremendously to the drugs.
Right.
And they would just blow up.
Bodybuilding Heroes and Legends Volume 1 by John Hansen is the book that celebrates the golden age of bodybuilding. This was the era in which legends such as Arnold Schwarzenegger, Sergio Oliva, Frank Zane, Robbie Robinson, Cal Skalak, and Mike Menser battled it out on stage for the biggest titles in bodybuilding. Read about some of the most exciting competitions that took place in the 1970s, including the Oliva-Schwarzenegger battles, Zane's first Olympia victory, and Skalak's controversial Mr. Olympia appearance, and much more. Filled with inspiring images of some of the greatest bodybuilders in the history of the sport, Bodybuilding Heroes and Legends Volume 1 is now available on Amazon.com, or email John directly at naturalolympia@gmail.com.